make that happen. And so as Dr. Garcia and I talked about our plans, and seeing at that point in time in January every year, and you'll see that coming up, announcements go out that if people are interested in retiring, help us know sooner rather than later so you can provide for orderly transitions and hire people to replace them. Dr. Garcia, Kathleen Christie, at least at this table, are two of the people that I have appointed to positions over those 13 years. And every year, sometimes I get criticized more years than others, but I believe the reorganization of the district should be responsive to the needs of kids, the assets that the district has, and should reflect the complexities that we face and leverage every resource we have to better meet the needs of kids. And so as Patrick and I talked about those plans and how to transition through last spring, how to get the new school year up and going, and then when to announce his retirement and my retirement, we agreed that the best plan for transition for the district would be to do that, to work through the summer, get school up and going, and that the end of August, first part of September, we would both announce our plans so that the board would have plenty of time to work towards replacements. A little bit different status in terms of those announcements and how those are required to be done. Patrick, if he wants to not be penalized for leaving early, has to give 60 days worth of notice. For me, I'm on a 2-year contract with the board. The board hires 2 people, myself and the business administrator Roberts. We're 2-year publicly appointed officials in those roles with 2-year contracts. My current contract ends the end of June in 2016. My contract specifically says that if I want to seek any new or different employment, that I need to inform the board before I do that. I also believe in not only smooth transitions, but succession planning and building up young people as well as older people to be able to take on the roles and responsibilities that come before them. So on August 28th, I made the announcement to the board via a memo. Other people tried to characterize that in lots of different ways, which was very disappointing because those plans were in place for at least 8 or 9 months before I shared that with the board. Wanted to inform the board clearly what those plans would be, and then we started conversations about transition because people were surprised that both Patrick was leaving the end of October and that I'd be leaving the end of this school year, and how would we work towards having both stability and the great work that's there, but providing flexibility moving forward. The board has given me feedback over the years, and lots of deeper specific feedback this fall in particular, about the fact that when I was hired, I had little or no flexibility at all as the new superintendent of this district, and that took a little bit longer to be able to put in place the right people in the right roles to better serve the kids in this school district. And those of you that have been in the community long enough can remember the first couple of years I was here, 2003, 2004, there were a lot of changes where people had been in one job or one setting for a long period of time and maybe not in the job or setting that best fit their skill set and the needs of the district. So even though there's initially some questions and concerns about that, those changes I think have borne out time and time again the benefits of thoughtfully matching skill sets of leaders with needs of kids in schools and the development of our own employees moving forward. When I was hired, it was rare for any district employee to be promoted and advanced within the system. It was hard to be able to even get a large enough candidate pool to have qualified candidates referred out to a school. So we systemically started to build and grow our own leaders. We took advantage in the economic downturn of using ARA funds to create assistant principalships and internships to be able to invest in our local leaders, targeting and prioritizing diverse leaders, and then started to build that system so that we could grow our own teachers. Probably the first round of that surprised people when No Child Left Behind was early on and pretty aggressive in the regulations. Parapros and teachers had to meet a highly qualified standard, and that training with parapros, we have some incredible hourly employees in this district that have never been invested in. So we not only invested in helping them become highly qualified, but we helped them move towards teaching if they were interested and helping move that forward. We put together, Kathleen was in a different role at that point in time, but worked on different ways to not only become compliant with the needs of our English language learners, but to be more thoughtful in the skills that we provide to our employees, and then worked with the universities across the state to have English as a second language be required to get a teaching license in this state. That came from us. And it's been a requirement for our teachers and our employees going forward, particularly in core content areas at all levels, but all elementary teachers, regardless of specialties and so forth. But there's still gaps and still needs for building that pool of candidates. But finally, we started to be able to hire some of our own candidates. So in that planning, that transition planning, the board asked to do two things that some people would say aren't possible to do. But as I shared that with the board, I think it's been very open and very transparent in the attempt to provide stability in the current school year for the great work that's there, and providing flexibility as you hire a new superintendent to move forward. The agreements clearly talk about how anybody placed on the direct reports to the superintendent, the very nature of that placement is discretionary based on the superintendent's authority and role in law, in policy, and in written understanding with the administrators. And so there's been lots of confusion about how that played out and how that was communicated. There's been some very thoughtful people that said, well, we don't know you, we don't know the system, we don't know the people involved, and what's on paper does a very poor job of explaining that. And so one of those pieces that is critical, and I don't mean to spotlight my colleague here for a minute, Kathleen, but that transition plan had significant parts connected with it because Kathleen's announced retirement date and the desire to make sure that we sustain the work and equity that's gone on, because we've had this commitment to never allow our agency, as many others across the state, and particularly school districts have done, to let their equity work devolve into compliance work. That's unacceptable. And we've had that commitment all along to not let that happen. But we've been frustrated with the efforts through our courageous conversations and our investments in schools to try and get traction. And so as Kathleen said, I plan on retiring, and she said, I am firm and this is the date, and I've announced it to a number of people. I then thought this is a great time to free Kathleen up from day-to-day responsibilities and to then advertise a replacement for Kathleen for stability going forward and get more effort out into the schools to have equity plans at every school site. Every school has school improvement plans now. They did not when I was hired. They had plans, some of those that hadn't been even looked at for over 5 years. They're now annually looked at with the highest needs of kids. But the equity plan components within that school improvement plan are somewhat anemic in some of the schools. And some of the schools will start deeper conversations, and then they have struggles moving forward. Those of you that know me know I've been a clear, consistent advocate across the state for a balance between equity and advocacy and excellence, having high expectations for all kids and never letting go of that. We've been very transparent in sharing the data of our kids and have only asked that rather than throw rocks or stones, help us solve any problems or gaps that are in our system. And many of you have not only risen to that occasion, but have volunteered incredible amounts of time and expertise to help make that happen. The investments in community learning centers are a part of all that, and that's part of the transition plan. So with Kathleen talking about her retirement and now Patrick's imminent retirement coming the end of October, it was how do we leverage all the things that we know and seek additional resources to make sure that there's both stability, flexibility, but not stepping backwards at any level. There's absolutely no question in hindsight that the documents that I have shared with people fail to represent at any acceptable level the detail of thought and effort that went into the plan. I'm sorry. It's been very clear that people have misunderstood, been clearly misinformed on purpose by some people, and have clearly failed to recognize the history, the context, and the demonstrated competence in this commitment to equity work and developing that in our school district. So Kathleen has since, because of the concerns and issues that have been raised, has said, I've been encouraged, influenced, cheered on to not have a definite date, but to make sure that I see a transition through in a way that is successful for the community. Well, that changes the dynamics dramatically and would change the manner in which documents would have been shared. So people take pieces of the story without the whole story and misapply that. Had a great meeting earlier today with representatives of our equity employees and our SLOSA leadership and Kathleen to talk deeper about the gaps in the message.
Say what SLOSA is for people.
SLOSA is one of the many acronyms that we have in the public education system that are only outnumbered by the military. So sorry about the acronyms. SLOSA is the Salt Lake Association of School Administrators. So it's the group that represents all of the administrators in the district. And in many of the recent years, it's been 100% of the administrators in the district are members of that association or that group. And so in that meeting earlier today, they shared with me some very thoughtful ways to better represent what's been done, what the intention is, and how to move that message forward. I shared with them Kathleen's interest in not having a specific date for her retirement and how that transition plan of Dr. Garcia's work would look very differently with the 14 members, because they've always been 14 members. It was how to replace, because I asked Kathleen before we announced anything, I need a job description of what we want equity to look like going forward and get that advertised, get that out there publicly, and make sure we have that incumbent in place no later than the 1st of January. I still don't have that draft job description, don't need it so much now that Kathleen has decided to stay in that role, and now how do we move forward with other pieces? So the conversation today was very, very helpful in giving us better ways to describe the commitment to equity work, both in writing and in practice, and look forward to a week or two in the future as we continue to communicate, being able to share that broadly so that people are comfortable with that. I think it's fair to say that the concerns, multiple concerns in the lack of clarity, multiple concerns in the fear about what is sustainable and what's not, my naive nature, because those of you that know me, I'm an incredibly trusting person. I believe what people tell me, I take them at face value, and I support them, and am incredibly loyal to people that advocate for and serve young people well. And so Kathleen is obviously in this difficult spot where she didn't have enough information to better communicate to the community both the short-term and long-term plans, other than we were excited about doing deeper equity plan work at every school and having her expertise to make that happen. So any failure in clearly communicating what has been clearly evident under my tenure and what you can see in the schools and what you can see in the work in the community lands with me, and I am so sorry. But we will get it right. The reason that I've reorganized parts of the district every year in the 13 years I've been here is because I believe you never get it perfect, and that the people that believe it's right fail to respond to the needs of kids and communities and the changing nature of those. I expect that whatever we put out to help clarify the missing pieces of the story in the next few days or weeks at the most, will change between now and the end of June, because there are other people that are likely to retire, and you want those positions to be advertised and filled. The board has asked me not to replace on a permanent basis Dr. Garcia's position, so that the new superintendent will have the ability to have at least that level of flexibility moving forward. And so the increasing of direct reports to me is recognizing that I am not a lame duck. I will see this through. I'm committed to our mission. I'm committed to our plan, our student achievement plan, and to serving the families of this district where I grew up. I grew up in Salt Lake City schools. I am the first in my family to go to college. I am back here by choice and service. Love to tell you the story someday. I see Archie in the audience. He can tell you the story that I've shared with him about how I got here as a lowly kid from South High School and picking on the board for closing most of the schools that I went to growing up here in this great district. But the commitment to the community has been lifelong, and it will continue as long as I'm employed as the superintendent. And I am deeply sorry for my failure to better communicate. I naively believed people had seen, watched, and understood the history, the work, the actions, and that we would move forward successfully from there. And I can go on for days, and I would love the list of everybody that's in this room, because anytime you show up to a meeting that I'm a part of, I count on you to help us with the legislature, with the community, and recruiting candidates of diversity to better represent our community.
Thanks, McKell. So I may ask you to add a few things to that in just a few sentences, if you would. But I just want to say that I wish that I had known last January that you were thinking about retiring. It would have been helpful to have, I think, a little bit more time to do succession planning. Right now, I feel like the most important thing we have on our plates is the selection of a new superintendent. And I am deeply distressed at the idea that this might derail us from that incredibly important goal, when the whole purpose was to keep us on track so that we could select the best superintendent that we can to take over from McKell in June. So I wonder, Superintendent, if you could just give us in a few words why you asked the people whom you have asked, since Patrick is now no longer working for the Salt Lake City School District, although he'll come back in January to help us with our negotiations. Why did you choose the people that were on that ill-fated organization? You and Patrick.
Thank you. Again, at the point that was done and articulated, Kathleen had declared her intentions to retire at a specific date. But the three individuals, Larry, Brian, and Barbara, are currently incumbents, essentially performing 80% of the tasks they've been asked, and have then asked to pick up specific assignments that Patrick had to be able to sustain the work of the district. So they're successful in those current roles, asked to take on some additional responsibilities. Placement on the direct reports to the superintendent are discretionary in nature, therefore temporary in nature. But in that conversation earlier today, we brainstormed some great ways to further communicate that, so that as the board hires a new superintendent, there are ways in which that's clearly communicated, that the new superintendent would affirm that these are the right kinds of positions and or the right kinds of people, or to advocate for some changes with the board based on, I hope, because our careers and paths together have been focused on a student achievement plan that is research-based, focused on the needs of schools and effective schools. Again, I apologize for doing a historical review, but we've got a great group here in the audience that probably don't realize we're the only urban school district, I believe, in the country that went through a period of time without schools and school improvement because of the great work of our schools. We're committed to that and will remain committed, and want the board to find someone to replace me to move that forward. And yeah, I'm nervous about that. I've invested a lot since the time I was born on 440 Blaine Avenue to the time I went to Whittier Elementary to Lincoln Junior High and South High School, and am honored to have had the 13 and a half years by the time I retired. to serve as the superintendent of this incredible district.
So we don't yet know exactly how Kathleen's change of plans will impact the way the positions are described precisely. But can you talk about Kathleen a little bit?
Well, sure, we can have her talk about that. So the biggest change is the draft that people saw with the 3 people taking on Patrick's assignments was missing Kathleen, and that was very publicly, openly discussed, saying Kathleen was not aware yet of the details behind all of that and the need to be able to advertise for and replace her. Clearly, if you read the document and don't have any conversation nor history, that has scared the bejeebies out of a lot of people. And again, poor communication. So the first change that was noticed that was shared in our conversation earlier today is that it's all 4 of the people that directly supervise the work of the schools. It's 50% female, 50% male, 25% ethnic minority. It is Kathleen, it is Barbara, it is Brian, and it is Larry that are now on the direct reports to the superintendent with Patrick's retirement to stabilize the system. So that's the very first obvious thing that'd be different. The responsibilities from that draft, you saw lots of responsibilities that had been with Kathleen that weren't sure where they were going to go because we wanted to describe the new position. Now, whatever new position we seek will be related to work within the schools because Kathleen is currently going to stay in the current position. Had some great advice. Let's see, you got to look at the audience to see if the advisors are in the room. One of them is here, about the consistency of titles, about how important words are. I am sorry, my humor sometimes gets me in trouble. It's amazing that the board hired me. That's another story someday, about how they had never hired somebody that hadn't been a superintendent before. I was an assistant superintendent in a neighboring district. And my response to that board question during the interview process is, how's that working for you? And ended up in this position. And so how that then...
Point out that it was no one here who responded.
So it didn't work, I guess. But the assignments that were yet to be assigned were based on what was planned at that point in time to have a job description. They asked Kathleen and her department to put together of what would the ideal leadership position over equity look like for this district moving forward. Removing any of the compliance responsibilities that have encumbered that position, trying to further protect that work from a transition so that it doesn't devolve into compliance like we've seen at the state level and in other school districts around the state. So those assignments that are currently with Kathleen will remain with Kathleen, but now she needs to pick up some of Patrick's work too, because she's not going to move on. Then what do we need to do? Because I still believe we should have at least some additional investment in building the equity plans at the school level. Have been very, very clear that I think that you can embed in the school improvement plan what is the achievement gap you want to work on first. And we've been clear with the data that even though you can explain many of the gaps based on poverty, there are still gaps based on expectations that aren't high enough for all kids all the time. And that can be described in lots of different ways. And sometimes for some of the classrooms, it's clearly about expectations that are not high enough and cultural competence that's not strong enough. And you told me in a few sentences, and I keep talking, I'm sorry.
We'll stop
try and be quick
now. So board, we had a request from 2 board members to put this on the discussion